Today we'll be ranking the albums by Opeth. I will be including the new album called The Last Will and Testament. This will be a worst to best ranking, and we'll just include the 14 studio albums, not any other live albums, EPs, or compilations. So with that being said, let me jump right into it. Coming in at number 14 is Heritage from 2011. This was the album where they made the big shift to their progressive rock sound and stopped using the death growls. So for that reason, it's a very divisive album. I'm sure that they lost a lot of fans with this album, but I still think it's not too bad. It's also kind of strange that the album opens with a title track, which is just a 2-minute piano instrumental. Then the next track, The Devil's Orchid, which is more of an Opeth sounding track, and maybe the best song on the album, but it's still leaning towards a progressive rock sound. There's still some distorted guitars, but also sounds kind of like a King Crimson type of song. After this, the album starts to slow down, but there's still a few good tracks here. The next track, I Feel the Dark, has more of a folk music, Jethro Tull type of sound, and Mikael Åkerfeldt actually wanted to get Ian Anderson on this album, but never got a response from him, but more on Ian Anderson later. The next track, Slither, gets a little heavier, but still sounds like a progressive rock song. The next few tracks are kind of laid back and sound like classical music at times. Overall, it's an album that you have to appreciate for what it is. It's a very laid-back album. The next few albums are going to be better, and even Damnation was better, but I would not even call it or any of this a bad album. Coming in at number 13 is Sorceress from 2016. This was the first album I heard from the band as a new release. I'll be honest with you, I never liked it that much, but I think it has grown on me over the years. They open with a soft medieval-sounding instrumental called Persephone, but then it goes into the lead single called Sorceress, which I remember listening to when it came out. And I think it's one of the best songs on the album. It gets a little heavier than the other stuff. They don't use death growls, but it still shows the band playing some heavier music. I also like the guitar riff in the song. And then there's Wildflowers, which has a very 70s progressive rock sound with some big keyboard sounds and complex arrangements. Then there is Willow the Wisp, which was inspired by an old Jethro Tull song called Dung Ringhail from their Storm March album. But in general, this album has some of their heavier tracks from their prog period, but also some of their softer tracks from this period as well. Other standout tracks are The Seventh Sojourn with a Middle Eastern feel, and it's a decent album. It's grown on me, but I think they have better albums in their discography. Coming in at number 12 is In Cauda Venenum from 2019. This is the last album they released from what I would call the non-death growls period, and it's a pretty good album. They released it as a double album, with one being in English and the other in Swedish, but they're not the same albums. I think that they got a little more experimental in this album. This album gets a little heavy at times, minus the death growls. So you can hear hints of the band wanting to return to their old sound. Some of the songs have some awesome guitar riffs, others have more orchestral sections. The album has a loose concept, which is about loneliness, and you can hear that in the songs. Even if you're listening to the Swedish version and you don't understand the lyrics, you can still enjoy this. The album has lots of good songs, such as Garden of Earthly Delights with Pink Floyd-inspired synth sounds. Then there are big riffs on Heart is Hand, and then there are beautiful keyboards on Loveless Crime, or whatever it's called, and the progressive rock keyboards and the thick bass of Charlatan. Overall, a good album. Coming in at number 11 is Pale Communion from 2014. This is the album where they go full prog rock. It's the second album from their No Death Growls period, but I think they stepped up their sound on this album as they added more complex arrangements and just better songs. The opening track is Eternal Rains Will Come. It sounds like the kind of song you would hear from any of the big prog bands of the 70s, but with a much darker tone. One of the standout tracks is Cusp of Eternity. I think Mikael Åkerfeldt has some of his best vocals on this track, and also has some cool Middle Eastern melodies. There's one song that's over 10 minutes, and it's called Moon Above, Sun Below. This one gets a little heavy at times, but still has that progressive rock sound that they were going for. This track has some of those softer and heavier sections that the band is known for. Then there's a softer track called Elysian Woes, and a track called Goblin, inspired by an Italian progressive rock band of the same name. It also has a track River, which sounds very different than anything the band has done. It has this slight country rock type of sound, but overall, one of the best albums from the progressive rock or No Death Growls years. Coming in number 10 is Orchid from 1995. This is their first album. Also the first album I ever listened to, because when I discovered this band very late in their career, I discovered him sometime around 2015, and I remember somebody mentioned the name in this Facebook group, and I was interested. So I decided to start at their debut album, and I put it on. It was pretty cool. It was unlike anything I've ever heard before. And the album is very raw sounding. It doesn't have the most memorable songs, but it's something I can listen to front to back. It's probably more death metal and black metal, but there's still some of that softer folk music, and the progressive rock element is still here as well. The album opens with a 14-minute song called In Mist She Was Standing, and it just has a little bit of everything. It's also one of those gloomy songs, and then there's a song, Under the Weeping Moon, which has acoustic guitars. And right from the get-go, they were including softer tracks, such as Silhouette with the soft piano sounds. This also has the gloomy Forest of October and the more death metal sounding Twilight Is My Robe. Overall, pretty decent album. I still like it, even though I like a lot of the other ones better. Coming in number 9 is the new one, The Last Will and Testament from 2024. I did a full review of this. I'm going to link it at the end. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but in general, it basically represents the evolution of their sound. There's still elements of their past, but the most important thing with this album is the return of the death metal elements, specifically the death growls, which have been pretty much absent since Watershed from 2008. It's also a full concept album, the first in Still Life, and this still has a lot of that progressive rock influence, despite being heavier than recent albums. There's a wider range of vocal styles. Mikkel Ackerfeldt has his clean and death growls, and there's spoken word sections by Ian Anderson. There's orchestral elements. Overall, this is Opeth coming back to form. They're bringing heavier elements from their past, and they still have that signature progressive rock influences. So they're also doing new collaborations. So there's a lot going on in this album. I think it's the type of album that I feel I have it like a little low right now, but if I do another ranking like a year from now, this might go up like a few spots. But for now, I think it's at number 9, and that's so impressive for a new album that's only been out for about like a few days as of the recording of this. Coming in at number 8 is Damnation from 2003. This is the softer album that was part of a pair of albums that came out a few months apart, which were Deliverance, which was a heavy album, and Damnation, the lighter album. Now, in my opinion, it sounds like kind of a Porcupine Tree type of album, and probably has to do with the involvement of Steven Wilson. And it's also technically their first album where they don't have any death growls. The album is really good front half with Window Pane, which is just a soft and beautiful song. They followed up with a song called In My Time of Need, another one of my favorites. You can hear the Steven Wilson influence on that track. And another one of my favorite tracks is called Closure, which is more of an acoustic track. Kind of reminded me of Jethro Tull again. That name keeps coming up. And there's a song called To Rid the Disease, which has more orchestral elements. And they close with a song called Weakness, which is a slower, trippier, psychedelic type of song. Kind of reminded me of Led Zeppelin's The Rain song. And they probably use the same keyboards or something. But overall, it's a decent album if you don't mind listening to something that's very soft and relaxing. There's nothing heavy on here, but it's still a very good album. Coming in number 7 is My Arms, Your Hearse from 1998. This one shows the band writing some shorter songs. And by shorter songs, I mean songs that are under 10 minutes, as well as short interludes. And in comparison with the first two albums that had 10 and 20-minute songs. But it's still a strong album. It shows off their early progressive death metal style with lots of death growls as well as softer sections. It opens with a soft intro track, Prologue. It goes into April Ethereal and shows the band playing faster and heavier than before, but also includes some melodic sections as well, some slower parts. In addition to that, my favorite song is Demon of the Fall. This has some of those classic sounding Opeth guitar riffs, awesome double bass drumming, death growls, and some folky acoustic sections. Then there are softer songs like Credence and Madrigal. Overall, a very well-rounded album from their earlier period, so I still think it's pretty strong. Coming in at number 6 is Deliverance from 2002. This is part of the two albums I was talking about before, and this is the heavier one. Now, even though they call it the heavy album, it's not some softer parts. There's a song For Absent Friends, which is a softer interlude kind of song, but there are two songs I think that are two of the best songs, and the first one is Fair Judgment. One of the songs that has a little bit of everything. It has softer piano playing and clean vocals. You can tell at this point in their career they're leaning more into progressive rock, but probably my favorite song on the album is Masters Apprentices. This one has some really heavy guitars. It's one of those few times we hear those heavy chugging guitars in an Opeth song. The song's also filled with death growls and the heavy death metal type of sound. One of the more intense types of songs, so for that reason, I think it's a very strong album. Coming in number 5 is Still Life from 1999. It's a really good album, a concept album. It tells the story of this forbidden love, which involves religion and other related topics. One of those albums that has lots of softer songs in contrast with the heavier songs. There's a lot of heavy and light balance on this album. The opening track is The More, and this one starts off very softly, but also has elements of death metal as well as some progressive rock. Then there's Godhead's Lament, which has a typical progressive death metal sound. The soft acoustic Benighted, but then gets really heavy on the track Moonlapse Vertigo. The album also includes some of the more popular songs called Face of Melinda, which is still something they often play live. And it has Serenity Painted Death, which sounds like a typical Opeth song with a melodic death metal sound. Overall, it's a very strong album. I know some people have it all the way at number 1, but I have it high, and I still think it's a great album. Coming in at number 4 is Morningrise from 1996. This is the album that includes my all-time favorite song by Opeth, and that is the last song, To Bid You Farewell. It's a song that's very soft and melancholic, doesn't have any death growls, it's mostly acoustic, and it's a 10-minute song. But it's such a sad song. It's about heartbreak, but the way it's presented, it almost sounds like a song about death and dying. But this will always be my favorite Opeth song. It's a song that I can listen to like over and over. And this one song is going to give this album a lot of weight, which is why I have it up high. But that's not to say the rest is bad. The rest is very good. There's lots of long songs that are over 10 minutes. Other good songs are Advent, which sounds like some slow funeral doom music mixed with acoustic sections. There's some progressive death metal elements on here as well. There is The Night in the Silent Water, which is some of that progressive death metal. And the 20-minute Black Rose Immortal, which has a little bit of everything. And this song, Black Rose Immortal, sounds like death metal, black metal. There's some acoustic parts and a little bit of everything. This is a very strong album, and it's carried by my favorite song, To Bid You Farewell, so that's why it holds a lot of weight. Coming in number 3 is Blackwater Park from 2001. I think this is their most popular album. And I think it's the second album that I have listened to from this band after I listened to Orchid. This is the perfect album for anybody who wants to get into the band because it's the type of Opeth album that has a little bit of everything. It's very well-rounded. It can please the people who like the heavy stuff. It has plenty of soft acoustic stuff on it. It's a very good sounding album. This is the first time they had Steven Wilson working with them. The album has a track called Leper Affinity, which is just one of those songs that goes through many different changes. You never get bored listening to it. There was a song Bleak, which is probably one of the best songs. And they're bringing that progressive rock style, but still keeping the heaviness. Then there is the more acoustic folk sounding song called Harvest, which is also a great song. And I like the darker electric guitar sounds on this one as well. Overall, it's a really strong album. I think a lot of people would put it at number 1, but I have 2 more above it. And these picks might be a little controversial, but these are my personal picks and my personal preferences. Coming in at number 2 is Watershed from 2008. This is the last album with the death growls before the new album. So in other words, they went 14 years releasing albums without death growls. This album is the perfect example of the band playing progressive rock, but without abandoning their death metal roots. This is one of those albums that has some of their best soft songs, as well as some of their best heavy songs. The opening track, Coil, which is more of a laid-back track, also features a female vocalist whose name is Natalie Lorix. And then on the second track, Heir Apparent, they get heavy again, but with more of a focus on the progressive rock, as this song features heavy distorted guitars, as well as some haunting pianos. But they get heavy on this track as they bring in complex death metal guitar riffs and death growls in this track. They continue with another banger called The Lotus Eater, which is a song with both heavy and clean vocals and complex progressive rock sound, and followed by the softer track called Burden, which is one of my favorites. Overall, a very strong album. I think it doesn't get a lot of attention, and I think it's just a really great album. But my number 1 is going to be Ghost Reveries from 2005. I feel this is the band at their creative peak where they didn't lose the death metal component of the sound, but at the same time, I think they wanted to bring more of that progressive rock into their sound. So you get songs such as the 10.5-minute opener, Ghost of Perdition, that has a heavy death metal sound, but also incorporates different progressive rock influenced sections with a nice blend of death growls and cleaner vocals. Then there is The Baying of the Hounds, which has a progressive death metal sound, but also has some interesting shifts in sound with lots of melodic components to the sound. Then there is Beneath the Mire, with this Middle Eastern guitar melodies, which is another classic. But of course, there's some softer stuff, and one example is Atonement. But here they experiment with some different percussions and sounds. And another standout is The Grand Conjuration, which has lots of cool odd time signatures as well as some darker, more atmospheric melodies. This song is a prime example of how the band can balance the heavy and light and shift seamlessly between the progressive rock and the harsh death metal sound. So overall, this is close to being a perfect album, and that's why I have it at number 1. That's my ranking of the Opeth discography. Put your ranking in the comment section. We can compare and contrast, see where you put everything. Check out my review of the new album, The Last Will and Testament. I'm going to go into more detail if you want more info on that. And thanks for watching. Please give the video a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe. If you have not already, I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.